The year is 146 BC. The sun is choked out by the black smoke of burning Carthage, and the air tastes of ash, copper blood, and the salt of tears. From the high walls, the defenders watch in paralyzed silence, their knuckles turning white as they grip the rough stone battlements. Below them, the ground trembles. It is not an earthquake, but the rhythmic, thunderous footsteps of a mechanical beast. The Romans have arrived, and they have brought with them not just swords and shields, but a mathematical nightmare constructed from oak and iron. For the citizens huddled inside, this is the end of the world. The wooden structures rising from the dust are not merely engines of war. They are the physical manifestation of an empire's cold, calculated rage. Walls that had stood for centuries, defying wind and rain, are about to be dismantled like children's toys. Gates built to hold back entire armies are about to splinter into kindling. This is a terrifying reality of Roman siege warfare, a form of combat where engineering genius is weaponized into instruments of annihilation, making surrender the only rational choice before the slaughter begins. While the Romans did not invent the concept of siege, they perfected it with methodical brutality that bordered on the industrial. Other ancient powers relied on the passive violence of starvation, waiting months for a city to wither. Rome, however, did not wait. They brought machinery that could dismantle a civilization stone by stone, while the inhabitants watched helplessly from within. The Greek historian Polybius, who stood alongside the legions and witnessed these sieges firsthand, noted a chilling distinction in their method. He observed that the Roman army approached warfare not as impassioned soldiers, but as craftsmen. To them, a city was not a home. It was a demolition site, and every weapon was a precisely calibrated tool designed for a specific type of destruction. Consider the psychological terror of the Battering Ram, known to the legions as the Ares. It was named for the charging ram, and it represented the single most devastating psychological weapon in the Roman arsenal. To the untrained eye, the device was deceptively simple: a massive tree trunk, stripped of its branches, capped with a heavy head of iron or bronze, and suspended by thick chains within a protective wooden housing. This housing, the testudo or tortoise, was covered in raw, wet hide to prevent fire, moving slowly toward the gates like a living creature. But the simplicity masked the terrible effectiveness. Imagine the sound inside a besieged city. The rhythmic pounding of the ram against the gates created a low-frequency thud that vibrated to the ground and up into the bones of the defenders. It echoed through the streets like a death knell, a metronome counting down the seconds until the inevitable collapse. Each impact was a promise. The barrier between you and the Roman legions is failing. When the Romans deployed these machines against the walls of Jerusalem in 70 CE, they didn't just use one. They used coordinated teams working in shifts. The Jewish historian Josephus, trapped inside the suffocating walls of the city, described the approach of the ram with a visceral horror that transcends the centuries. He wrote, "The battering ram kept perpetually bearing against the wall in one and the same place, and it did at length overcome it." But reading between the lines of his account reveals a torture that was auditory as much as it was physical. The defenders could hear the Romans assembling the machine days before it arrived. They heard the squeal of the chains as the suspension was tested. They heard the centurions shouting orders, synchronizing the swing. Hours before the first blow was struck, the people of Jerusalem knew exactly where death would enter their city. The largest of these rams stretched over 100 feet in length, a leviathan of timber that required teams of up to 100 sweating, grunting men to operate. Roman engineers, consulting scrolls of mathematics, calculated the precise angles of impact based on the masonry of the enemy walls. They didn't hit the stone. They targeted the weak mortar joints, hammering them with the precision of a jeweler chipping a diamond. They employed a technique known as the perpetual battery, rotating fresh crews every few hours, so the pounding never stopped. Not for meals, not for sleep. The ram does not tire. At the siege of Avaricum in 52 BC, Julius Caesar's forces turned this mechanical persistence into an art form. The Gallic defenders, desperate and terrified, attempted every countermeasure their ancestors had taught them. They lowered mattresses stuffed with wool to cushion the blows, hoping to soften the impact. They threw grappling hooks to catch the ram's head, trying to pull it upward. They even sent men on suicide missions, rappelling down the walls to set the tortoise roof ablaze. Nothing worked. Caesar's engineers had designed the roofs with steep slopes, causing the burning oil and fire arrows to slide harmlessly off the wet hides. Within days, the synchronized pounding created harmonizing vibrations that shook the mortar to dust. When the walls finally groaned and collapsed, the Romans poured through the breach. They slaughtered 40,000 men, women, and children. The ram had not killed them directly. It had simply opened the door for the executioners. As the military writer Vegetius later noted, capturing the cold ethos of the legion, the battering ram knows neither fatigue nor mercy and continues its work until the wall falls or the defenders submit. But if the ram was a hammer, the ballista was the sniper's rifle. This weapon transformed siege warfare from a contest of brute endurance into a game of precision artillery. Built on the principle of torsion power, the ballista used twisted bundles of horsehair or animal sinew, tightened to a screaming tension, to store tremendous energy. When released, the arm snapped forward, firing iron-tipped bolts with such velocity that the human eye could barely track them. These were not clumsy catapults. A large ballista could hurl a projectile weighing over 3 pounds across distances exceeding 400 yards. During the agony of the siege of Carthage in 146 BC, Roman ballistae maintained a wall of fire so constant that the defenders could not even stand up to man their own battlements. The historian Appian recorded the gruesome aftermath. He noted that the bolts struck with such force that they didn't just kill, they neutralized. A bolt would pass through a soldier's bronze breastplate, tear through his torso, exit his back, and embed itself a foot deep into the wooden palisade behind him. The dead were left pinned to the walls like insects in a collection, grim warnings visible to their comrades. The psychological impact was shattering. Defenders realized that the walls, which should have been their sanctuary, had become a trap. There was no safety from the mechanical hatred raining down from the Roman lines. Unlike the catapults of other nations that fired in high arcs, the ballista fired on a nearly flat trajectory. This meant trained crews could target specific officers, standard bearers, or anyone trying to rally the defense. At the siege of Masada in 73 CE, the Jewish defenders believed they were untouchable. They were perched on a desert plateau nearly 1,400 feet above the Dead Sea terrain. It was a fortress designed by nature to be impregnable. The Roman engineers viewed this not as a problem, but as a challenge. They constructed a colossal earthen ramp, moving thousands of tons of dirt and stone, a project that took months. As the ramp rose, inch by agonizing inch, ballistae were positioned at ascending heights. Josephus notes that the defenders watched their doom being built literally beneath their feet. They could do nothing to stop construction crews, because the ballistae picked off anyone who dared to look over the wall. By the time the siege tower crested the ramp, the defenders had already accepted their fate. The Roman crews operated with the discipline of modern artillery teams. The manual attributed to Heron of Alexandria details the science behind the slaughter. Crews calculated trajectory based on target distance, wind conditions, and humidity affecting the torsion of the ropes. This was murder by mathematics. While the ballista offered precision, the onager offered raw, catastrophic violence. Named after the wild ass of the desert because of the violent kick it gave when fired, the onager was Rome's answer to heavy stone fortifications. It relied on a single massive torsion spring and a throwing arm that whipped forward to hurl stones weighing up to 130 pounds. When Roman forces besieged Jerusalem, the onager created a sound that the defenders learned to fear more than thunder. Josephus described projectiles as dark shapes against the sky. In the daylight, the white stone of the projectile was sometimes blackened by the Romans to make it harder to see against the sun, or conversely, the white stone against the dark sky gave defenders a split second to scream. Josephus recorded one incident where a stone decapitated a man standing near the wall. The force was so immense that his head was sent flying 300 feet, while his body stood upright for several heartbeats, the nerves not yet realizing the brain was gone. But the true horror of the onager emerged at night, under the cloak of darkness. Defenders could not see the arc of the stones. The only warning was a distinctive crack thud of the release mechanism in the Roman camp. Then silence, a terrifying, hanging silence that lasted for seconds until the stone crashed down, crushing buildings and turning men into red mist. Sleep became impossible. Soldiers developed what modern psychology might call shell shock. The 1,000-yard stare of men living under constant artillery fire. They flinched at shadows. They deserted. At the siege of Aquileia in 361 CE, the sheer kinetic energy of the Onager was put on display. The defenders had fortified the city, confident in their masonry. The Roman engineers, unimpressed, positioned 8 Onagers in a semicircle, focusing their fire on a single section of the wall. For 3 days, the machines hurled stones in a relentless rotation. The constant pressure prevented any repairs. On the 4th day, the physics of the wall failed. The section collapsed inward, burying dozens of defenders beneath thousands of tons of rubble. The Romans poured through the dust, and the massacre that followed was absolute. If the Onager was a destroyer of walls, the siege tower, or Hellepolis city taker was the bypass. These were mobile skyscrapers, sometimes exceeding 100 feet in height, designed to deposit fully armed legionaries directly onto enemy battlements. The construction of a siege tower was a spectacle of dread. Defenders watched a wooden monolith grow taller each day, a tower filled with men whose only purpose was to kill them. During the siege of Jerusalem, the Romans built 3 such towers. They were plated in iron and draped in raw hides, soaked in vinegar to repel fire. They rolled forward on massive wooden wheels, pushed by hundreds of straining slaves, while ballistae mounted on the upper decks fired down into the city. Defenders with everything they had: stones, fire, curses. But the towers just kept coming, the iron plating deflecting the attacks with the sound of hail on a tin roof. The design was brutally practical. The lower levels housed the propulsion teams, and a battering ram to smash the lower walls. The middle levels held the infantry, dark and crowded, waiting for the order to charge. The top platform held archers and scorpions to sweep the walls clear. When the tower finally slammed against the city wall, a reinforced bridge dropped with a deafening crash. Suddenly, the vertical separation of the siege was gone. It was now a horizontal battlefield. At Carthage, when the bridge dropped, 50 legionaries surged across in the first wave. The fighting was claustrophobic and desperate. Bodies piled up on the bridge, the wood slick with blood, as men stabbed and clawed at each other in a space barely wide enough for 2 soldiers to stand abreast. But the Romans had an endless supply of fresh troops cycling up from the lower levels. The defenders had no reserves. By sunset, the Romans held the wall. By dawn, Carthage was a memory. Finally, there was a silent killer, the Scorpio. A smaller cousin of the Ballista, the Scorpio was the ancient world sniper rifle. Mounted on portable frames, these weapons fired iron-tipped bolts designed specifically to kill people, not destroy walls. At the siege of Alesia in 52 BCE, Julius Caesar deployed hundreds of them. The Scorpio was terrifying because of its stealth. Unlike the crashing stones of the Onager, the Scorpio killed quietly. A defender would be repairing a wall, and suddenly, with sharp twang and a wet thud, he would collapse, a bolt buried in his neck. There was no explosion, no warning, just invisible death striking from 300 yards away. The psychological effect was paralytic. Defenders were afraid to show their heads. They moved only at night. The walls became death zones. The Roman approach to siege warfare was a combined arms symphony. The ram broke the gates. The ballista pinned the defenders. The Onager shattered the fortifications. The siege tower delivered the death blow, and the scorpion hunted the survivors. Each weapon complemented the other, creating a system of mechanized warfare that few ancient cities could withstand. Josephus, who witnessed this machinery from both sides of the wall, concluded that the Roman army possessed a science of besieging that made courage irrelevant. Cities built over centuries could be dismantled in weeks. The Romans demonstrated that walls, no matter how high, were merely temporary obstacles to men who understood physics and leverage. If you were a commander of an ancient city, watching the dust rise on the Roman lines, you faced a haunting question. Do you surrender and live as a subject? Or do you fight, knowing that Roman engineering has already calculated the date of your death? The weapons that turned cities into mass graves did not just destroy stone. They destroyed hope. And that was the true genius of the Roman war machine. Subscribe to the channel for more dark history.